Coming up on this special edition of the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest budget news from the state capitol with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts your school district. We've got all of our budget experts here today to tell you everything you need to know about the upcoming state budget.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it's a couple of minutes after 3 o'clock. We welcome you on a Friday to this special edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Dr. Edgar Zazweta, ACSA's Executive Director. I'm Naj Ali Khan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Again, welcome. So happy to have you here on a Friday on Budget Day. Go ahead and jump into the chat and say hello and let us know where you're watching from today. Edgar, it's always a big day here at ACSA, obviously throughout the state of California and with public education. Budget Day. This is one of those days where we are just kind of locked in from the very first moment.
I know. I was just happy to be here, get here, Naj. I was, we'll get into it. I was down in Southern California here earlier today, so I know I didn't want to disappoint you. I know Budget Day is one of your favorite days of the year. Just year in and year out, and obviously us trying to make sense of everything, and we'll get into this at the end. I know it's a somewhat challenging day for as I said, I was in Los Angeles, a tough day for so many of our folks, so many folks in our community, educators, otherwise, just all of us that have connections to Southern California. Tough time with the wildfires, and I know that's looming heavy on everybody, including the governor, right? Like they had to change up how they did things today in presenting the budget, just because their attention is on responding to the disaster. And I know us at ACSA trying to help do our little part, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth mentioning. We've had a lot of members who've contacted us saying, "Hey, how can we help?" Over on the ACSA Resource Hub, we have put a vetted list of organizations, of associations that are out there doing some type of wildfire recovery and support for the victims, not just right now, but also setting up processes for after the fire. So if you are interested in getting more information, you can go to the ACSA Resource Hub. We'll put a link into our chat and then talk about that at the end of the broadcast today. Of course, I do want to pop up a photo, Edgar, because this is the team from exactly 5 years ago today on Budget Day. You can see there's you and I right there in the front. Who would believe 5 years later all of the stuff that's taken place here in the world? But that's us exactly 5 years ago today.
Oh, look at that! Like that was I like that studio there. That's that was my introduction there to broadcasting there with you, Naj. And I want to know who made us pose for that picture in the front, and that first picture you had up. I don't know. I don't know if that's a legitimate picture or not. All of us pretending to be very studious there, dissecting the budget.
Yeah. You know what? AI wasn't such a big deal back then, but I do think that we were a little bit posed for that one. So, what can you say? All right, Edgar, let's go ahead and jump right into this budget. Let's give you the particulars, the headlines right off the top. The governor is proposing an overall balanced budget of $322.3 billion, of which $228.9 billion representing the general fund. There are $16.9 billion in total reserves, and the reserves are broken up into three categories: $10.9 billion in the rainy day fund, $1.5 billion in the California Public School Rainy Day Fund, and $4.5 billion in a special fund for economic uncertainties, which we'll talk about in just a couple of moments. Edgar, a lot of that information came out on Monday when the governor was giving a bit of a briefing at one of his news conferences on the road. But just your first look at those numbers, what's the initial reaction?
Yeah, I always try to give some perspective too. I mean, I think about the last couple of years. Last year, I think at this time, we were very worried about, what could be about deficits. I think that was the headline last year, the record deficits that we were facing. So obviously things have changed in the positive realm in that sense that there's more revenues right now coming in. The governor and the Department of Finance, when they put their projections, they all always take a very cautious approach and about what may happen in the out years, and that there's still some deficits that could be forecasted in those years. But at least right now, the fact, I think it is good. I'm a big believer in let's count our blessings that at least on that end, we're not talking about cuts. We're not talking about trying to close that deficit. I think the other big takeaway for me is that this is a budget that's very much of let's just follow through on the commitments that the state has made, as opposed to what we're often talking about here on January 10 is a bunch of new stuff, new ideas, new programs that we're telling our members, hey, well, we're going to have to dig into the details. There wasn't a lot of that. It was more about funding the things that have already been in place. As I say every year, our job is to nitpick, and you're going to hear from our team to go in and find the things that we don't like, find the things that can have an improvement. As we say every year, every time, this is the first step in the process. The legislature will have their take on this. Undoubtedly, there's some pieces, and we have already found some. There's, I know Yvonne and the team will get into that about some of those things that we're going to want to have some discussion with the legislature, with the governor's office, hopefully to have some refinement before the final product come May.
Yeah. Let me give you the particulars of the numbers that matter to our members and our viewers the most. With respect to Proposition 98, the guarantee is calculated at $119.2 billion. Just to put that in perspective, the 2015-16 guarantee was $69.1 billion. Edgar, if I was good at math, I would tell you exactly what the percentage is of that, but I'm not. However, this budget proposal, the Prop 98 figure is $117.6 billion, which is a $1.6 billion difference for students. And the governor's budget proposes a COLA of 2.43%, which is slightly lower than the legislative analyst's office, their projected COLA of 2.46%, Edgar. So this gives us an opportunity to bring in Yvonne Carrillo, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. Yvonne, thanks for joining us here on a Friday on this special edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. I just went through the Prop 98 numbers there, the COLA, some of the figures a little bit down from where the calculation is. Yvonne, you were listening to both events, the Monday event and today as well. Your thoughts on the Prop 98 and the COLA piece?
Yeah, I think just big picture, one theme is just how much uncertainty there is. And so the governor talked about that, his staff today, with the Department of Finance reiterated this point. That there was already anticipated economic uncertainty, just changes at the federal level, things taking place internationally, but with the wildfires that are ravaging Southern California, I mean, that just adds a whole nother layer to this in terms of what those impacts will be in terms of the revenues and the economic situation of the state. So that's one. I think just an important note here is in some ways, there's really unique challenges here that the state's going to be grappling with and unique uncertainties. Some of this stuff that's played out before is likely to play out again. But in terms of Proposition 98, that's one area that's really caught our attention. So the governor is proposing funding Proposition 98 below the minimum guaranteed funding calculation level. So he's proposing funding it specifically $1.6 billion less than what the minimum guarantee actually is for the 2024-2025 year. That's area for concern. I think that approach is unprecedented. We were just with the Department of Finance, and they were saying that this is the rationale for this is that it's smart budgeting given the fiscal uncertainties. That if the 98, if the revenues come in and allow for a full funding of the original number, again, that's $1.6 billion higher, then they would fund that. It would come as a true up at a later time in the next fiscal year. But anytime you're talking about underfunding 98, that's just an area that is going to cause some real concern from us. you're taking funding off the table that we would be able to advocate for ACSA's priorities and priorities that we know are important to our public schools. And so just want to make sure that folks have a sense of that, and we'll be monitoring that and seeing where that's going. But that's an area for concern.
Yvonne, let me just double down on that, just because I know sometimes for our members, they don't get so caught up in the big Prop 98 numbers, but just to underscore the importance of what you just said. So in other words, it's the governor has said, we're acknowledging that the Prop 98 level is at X amount, right? And you threw out the numbers there. If I try to recite them again, I'm going to mess them up. But essentially that we're at a higher amount. We're only going to fund you. We're going to fund you less than that. Now they're saying this isn't the final budget. We don't anticipate that, whether it be our obligation or whether they can afford that this is going to play itself out in May. Nonetheless, I think it's safe to say that if the budget was adopted today with that discrepancy, that's not allowed, right? Like if we have the obligation, the Prop 98 obligation is X amount, they have to fund this at that amount. What I think they're channeling, right, is that something's going to change from here to May. Likely, I think it's safe to say that they don't intend to give us those dollars, or they would have put those out. Now, obviously, I think it's going to be our job to kind of push on that. If that is the obligation the state has to fund schools at a higher level, then I'm sure us and most of our colleagues in the statewide associations will follow suit and do that, right?
No, you hit that exactly right. I mean, there's always a truing up that happens. I mean, revenues continue to take place and come in, and the dust settles well beyond the budget adoption deadline. And so it's not anything new that the state trues up for the actual Prop 98 calculated amount. What is new, though, is saying we're going to acknowledge that amount, but we're going to propose to fund you at a lower level, and then we'll true up and give you more if at a later time, if revenues materialize. So again, I don't think there's any precedent for this in terms of the state moving this direction. At its worst, it delays money getting out to the field.
Mm-hmm.
It takes money in terms of off the table that we would be able to again advocate for our priorities here during the budget negotiation process.
All right, Yvonne, stay with us. We will come back to you because we want to talk about the advocacy that's so important locally and at the state level. So stick with us. We'll be back with you in just a couple of moments. We want to hit on a couple of topics, Edgar. And so we're going to bring in our legislative advocates right now. We will start with Diana Vu and Cordell Hampton. They will be covering a number of topics and give you some analysis on how it impacts your school district. Diana and Cordell, so good to have you. Cordell's very first appearance.
Inaugural visit on the legislative lunch.
Happy to be here.
I mean, you're here on budget day, so we won't give you as much of a hard time. Diana knows we are not nice to the rookies.
Oh, make sure they don't get a photo of you. That's something that
we'll give them a chance.
We'll never live down.
Yeah. Diana, let's talk universal transitional kindergarten. The budget proposal provides a total of $2.4 billion ongoing Prop 98 dollars. That is inclusive of all prior year investments to support full implementation of UTK. And there's also $1.5 billion ongoing Prop 98 dollars to support lowering the student to adult ratio from 12-1 to 10-1 in every TK classroom. Diana, your thoughts on this, on the proposal, and how this impacts school districts?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're very excited to see this. The governor had mentioned in his budget conference and in the release that he's committed to maintaining this commitment. And with UTK being a priority program of his, it's obvious he has fully funded it, and he wants to support LEAs and making sure that the implementation is successful and remain successful, especially when we see the 1 to 10. Just a few years ago, the legislature had removed the contingency language to provide funding for that ratio. So ACSA had been working on this for a year or two, trying to add funding back to that. And so we're really happy to see that it has made it into the budget. Now, we know that this is not going to solve all all the LEA problems out there, because we know that money does not bring in staff and that there is still staffing shortage. But we do know that this is a step in the right direction. This is something we want to see. This is not a fight that we're going to have, which is really fantastic.
Diana, just again on this point, credit to you and others in the community who I know have been really consistent on this theme, because I know I'm sure we talked about this in some shows a year or more ago about when they took that language out, that there was going to be that ratio regardless of whether we got funding
That's
or
right.
not. So at least the governor is now proposing that, yes, that ratio is going to change, but at least now what they're saying is that it will be accompanied with increased new funding, correct?
That's right. And also want to reiterate too that the proposal does rebench Prop 98 to account for the additional students who will turn 4 by September 1st. So.
Cordell, let's switch over to the student support block grant. In addition to the COLA adjustment to LCFF, which we talked about earlier, the budget includes $1.8 billion in one-time Prop 98 dollars for a discretionary block grant. Now, these funds will be earmarked for LEAs and provide them with additional fiscal support to address some rising costs as well as fund statewide priorities. And there's a list of these statewide priorities, but they include professional development for teachers, career pathways and dual enrollment, as well as teacher recruitment and retention strategies. What's your analysis on this? What did you see, and how does this impact our members in their local areas?
I think this $1.8 billion allocation is something that we should be rejoicing about, be very excited about. Especially the fact, after a conversation with DOF, that it's 100% discretionary, very similar to the arts program or the arts block grant a couple of years ago. It's 100% discretionary. Schools can use it in any way. There are a couple key areas, but again, I think that flexibility allows for school districts to address a lot of issues that have kind of presented itself over time. So I think it's something we should be looking forward to this year, and hopefully can be maintained.
Diana, let me ask you about the expanded learning opportunities program, specifically before school, after school, summer school. The budget includes $435 million ongoing to cover the cost of full implementation, increasing the total ongoing program funding to $4.4 billion. That's Prop 98 dollars. And this funding includes ongoing support to LEAs with less than 55% unduplicated pupils to provide access to all unduplicated pupils. Okay, if you can, give us a little bit of information on that. Because
translate what Naj just said.
Thank you. I was just going to say, translate that.
Yeah, I know it's kind of wordy a lot, but this is also another example of the governor being committed to his priority programs. And this one in particular, I would say, is one of his signature programs. This program, I don't know if you all remember, just popped up in the May Revise one day out of basically nowhere. No one knew what it was, and it was a huge program. So that was a shock then, but we're really happy to see how it's turned out, happy to see his commitment to this. And really what you need to know is that it's increased the ongoing amount, as Naj had mentioned. And then for that 55%, it means that tier one, the tier one threshold has been lowered to 55%. So ACSA has been working on a lot of advocacy to stabilize rate 2. Now, a lot of these LEAs don't have to worry about fluctuating funding costs anymore. With that said, though, more money comes greater requirements. So now tier one, every UPP student has to be, every student has to be served, not just UPP. That's an important distinction from those that were under what was currently tier one, which is 75%. So now it's 55%. But I also want to bring up the rate 2 folks who will now be under 55%, is that in last year's budget, there was a method to stabilize rate 2. So that will still be there. It's pulling in any funds from ELOP that have not been used. So now I feel like overall rate 1 and rate 2 will be very stabilized, and hopefully more LEAs are rejoicing about this.
Diana, you just answered the question I was going to say. So I think the one piece, and I'm sure we'll get some opinions and thoughts from our members, but so I think very good news, right? That the number of folks that got that more stable fund, that higher level, is going to increase from those with unduplicated accounts from 75 to 55%. And you answered my question that presumably then that also means their level of commitment of who they have to serve also goes up in terms of they have to serve everybody, right? Well, which right now they only had to serve unduplicated students, if I'm not mistaken.
For rate 2 at under 75%, yes, only has to serve unduplicated students. With that said, though, the penalty is proportionate. Right. So whatever you don't do, that's what you're giving up, not everything.
Got it.
See? Thank goodness Diana explained that, because Lord knows I couldn't. Cordell, let me ask you about the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant, $378.6 million in one-time Prop 98 dollars to support this block grant. And it's going to support LEAs in establishing learning recovery initiatives through the 27-28 school year. What can you tell us about this?
I think, as many of us can remember, a couple of years ago during the COVID pandemic, we had a learning recovery emergency block grant. And so that was set to expire in 27-28 school year. And so it seems like the governor's office is looking at that again, the administration is looking at that. And we're adding more money into that block grant, which is $378.6 million. And so I think the legislature is recognizing the need to continue its commitment to learning recovery since COVID-19 and other emergencies, as we know, that are currently happening. And so I think moving forward, this gives schools a little more ability and kind of getting students and families back on track to where we were before the pandemic.
And Cordell, there were a couple of other things you wanted to address, some requirements for the upcoming year.
I think in addition to the kind of the TK requirement, something that also kind of stood out to us was that in the proposed January budget, there wasn't any allocation towards ethnic studies requirement. As you remember, the legislature had pushed very hard on that. And so it'd be really interesting to see the legislature's response and how that gets taken care of, whether or not in the budget or not. I think something else is also mentioned was the Portantino bill around dyslexia screeners. There is some funding for that as well. And so we're hopefully making some good commitment and good progress on the requirements set for the upcoming 25-26 school year.
And I have to note Catherine Castleberry's comment there. I just want to know, we hired Cordell because he said he was a minimalist. He doesn't need books. He doesn't need files. That's why there's nothing in his office. But now we'll get Yvonne. He's been busy trying to analyze the budget. He doesn't have time to decorate his office.
Oh, don't give Yvonne that much credit. Come on now. We could have at least thrown a plant or something.
Cordell will now have the pressure when he gets that picture. Sometime from when Cordell is with us and Naj and Michael pull up that picture of his first appearance, we'll have a before and after, and we'll no pressure on decorating the office. But
of course, over time, I'll slowly accumulate things, and it'll look a lot nicer and homelier.
Perfect. That works. That will certainly work. Diana Vu and Cordell Hampton, thank you guys so much for being with us here on this special edition of the lunch break. Edgar, a couple of other topics we definitely want to cover today, including teacher preparedness, master plan for career education, and of course, retirement. Let's bring on two more of our ACSA legislative advocates, Dorothy Johnson, Saret Kaminsky with us here, veterans of the ACSA legislative lunch break. So good to have you, Dorothy, and Saret on with us. Saret, let's talk real quick about the teacher preparation and professional development. To address the educator shortage, the budget includes proposals designed to support teachers and improve the educator pipeline, which includes $150 million, one-time Prop 98 dollars to provide financial assistance for teacher candidates through the new teacher recruitment incentive grant. That provides an additional $100 million, Prop 98 dollars to extend the timeline of the existing National Board Certification Incentive Program. A lot to that, Saret. What can we tell these school districts about what all of this means?
Yeah, great. Thanks for spitting out those numbers so I don't have to memorize. I appreciate that. So I would say in regards to the National Board Certification Incentive Program, that really is a program that incentivizes highly qualified teachers coming into these schools, into the high poverty schools. And then I would say we also really need to see a lot of details, especially on that teacher recruitment incentive grant program. As you said, $150 million, it's one-time money. We always need to look at the details, just making sure that there's a recognition of local efforts. Sometimes language can be strict on the service providers being only institutes of higher education. So will this be open to candidates pursuing a certification from an LEA-based program? That's something that I'll be looking for in the language. Will the funding be open to candidates? Will that be contingent in any way, such as the way the Golden State Teachers Program was in the last budget? Just making sure that we're looking at all the educator pathways that we utilize for recruitment, including those that come from LEAs. So just making sure we look at that.
Dorothy, I know that this is going to take us just momentarily off of the state budget, but I do want to talk to you a little bit about retirement, what the Biden administration signed off on the GPO WEP.
Yeah, so we got some really great news as the Biden administration is winding down in its final days. A major hard-fought victory for our ACSA retirees and actually all of our members and California educators and other public servants. The repeal of what's known as the WEP GPO, but basically it's a penalty for anyone who had worked in a job that made Social Security contributions and also were employed in a public sector position that had a government pension. So this means new Social Security benefits will be rolling out to tens of thousands of Californians, and need to give a huge shout out to our council retired leaders. Special mention to Shelton Yip and Kathleen McCreary, who are part of a national task force on this effort. They have the slogan, their tagline of, even though they're the retirees, they are working for all of ACSA members. And this dedication, this effort really, really shows that. And it shows, persistence can pay off. This has been a national or coast to coast priority, a statewide ACSA priority for years and years and years. So just lots of great news and a great thing to celebrate and kick the year off with.
Dorothy, we don't get to talk about like federal wins very often. And
that's true.
This was a big one, right? Like in my time here at ACSA, even before ACSA, I know we never said this. We would get this question probably every year, lobby days on these shows like this and our federal advocacy. And we'd always have to answer, and we'd talk about the efforts and our folks pounding the pavement, going to Congress every year, sending the letters, doing the advocacy. But I always felt like we had to say, okay, but we don't see this happening, right? And then all of a sudden the momentum just picked up and it got across the finish line. So this is quite a success story.
One of the messages that I think really started to resonate is when Congress and Senate realized, oh my gosh, this applies to me too, potentially.
Yeah.
So yeah, just a really great victory. And the Social Security Administration will start rolling out information. A lot of folks don't need to do anything. And CalSTRS, while they are elated, does not have resources. You need to work with the federal government. But CalSTRS will have some information available for those to redirect you to the Social Security Administration.
All right. And folks, I've completely forgotten to make mention of this, but if you have budget questions, go ahead and put those into the chat. We'll try and answer some of those as we come closer to the end of the show. Saret, let me go back to the state budget, specifically the master plan on career education. The budget proposed including dual enrollment and pathway programs as allowable expenditures for funds allocated through the $1.8 billion student support and discretionary block grant. The budget also includes an increase of $3 million ongoing Prop 98 funds to support the California College Guidance Initiative and the Cradle to Career Data system. Also, and I'm hearing my CTE council members, I'm trying to use that lens. Saret, you and I both working very closely with our CTE council, so I'm imagining them as I say this. Also, to reduce the administrative burden for LEAs offering CTE programs, the budget proposes to direct the Department of Education to examine the feasibility of streamlining applications for TK through 12 CTE programs into a single consolidated application instead of administering each program through a separate application process. Saret, your thoughts?
I need one of those little buzzers, I'm cautiously optimistic about that state direction to streamline all those CTE related programs into a single consolidated application. ACSA has been relentless. We've been meeting with state agencies on this aspect. Pleased to see this. Members have been critical to this cause in their representation at the regional meetings that have been held all of last year. The state has obviously heard our appeals, but operationally, there's a lot of work on how we're going to be streamlining this, how this is going to be revamped while minimizing any operational changes in service delivery for our students. That'll be big. Also, how will funding to LEAs be affected by the allocation and the formula changes? We need a lot of details here. Looking forward to all the work with the state agencies to work alongside them and figure this out. There's also some other aspects that we need some information on. There's also a call out in the summary, $100 million for one-time Prop 98 funds to the community colleges to expand the state's first career passport. This would allow students to create formal documentation of their marketable skills, also give them like a state validated transcript for their skills earned from both educational and work experience. There's also a call out for $5 million on ongoing general fund for establishing a planning and coordinating body. So these are pieces that, again, it's going to take a lot of work to roll it out. Anxious to roll up our sleeves here. I know our CTE Council, as well as our Adult Ed Council, are really engaged on this topic area. 2 hours ago, I met with CAIA leadership. They represent the adult administrators. We were talking a lot about this budget, what we do and don't see. Lots of call outs on the importance of adult education in the master plan rollout, but then looking for those details in the operational sense that help amplify our LEA run programs.
Saret, I don't know if you noticed this because you were speaking, but we started talking about CTE. And then at exactly 3:32, our great board member, Efren Guizar, who's also a member of the CTE Council, put in the comment section, #CTE works. So always good to see our CTE Council members involved. Dorothy Johnson, Saret Kaminsky, ACSA Legislative Advocates. Thanks so much for being with us today. Edgar, we have rounded the bottom of the hour, but I do want to bring Ivan Carrillo back onto the show, ACSA's Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations, if he is on the, yes, absolutely he is. Ivan, we did get a question in the chat about, here it is, from Steve Dickinson. Steve asked, do you hear any talk on the topic of ongoing funding for the new ethnic studies requirement? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, to clarify, the governor is not proposing funding that would trigger the requirement to offer ethnic studies in the coming school year. So that certainly is really notable. As mentioned by Cordell, the legislature might have a very different take and may push back on this. Certainly, they've been big proponents of ethnic studies by and large. But yeah, in the governor's budget proposal, there is no money that would trigger the requirement to have to offer ethnic studies in the coming year.
Yvonne, I imagine that, like you said, this one way or another, I think it's going to garner some discussion. Sometimes it's not what's in the budget, but what's not in the budget. That was, as Saret was just talking about in some other issue areas, I think this was one of them that I know came up in one of the briefings we're in. So yeah, I presume there will be some feelings in the legislature and there will be some robust discussions about the path forward on this one.
Yvonne, I want to ask you about next steps now. We've got the budget proposal that's out. We know the May revision comes in around mid-May. What's the process now and how can members be involved?
Yeah, the next step in this process is waiting for the details. And so that comes out in bill language here. We'll have that by February 1st. It is the deadline by when we need to have that. And as has been said by pretty much everybody on today's show, the devil is in the details. And so we'll see once that drops, just all the specifics of all these different changes. Certainly there are some areas of concern that we've highlighted. I think even the things that we feel generally positive about, sometimes they surprise us and some of the things need to get worked out over the coming months to make sure that they're implemented in the best way possible. So yeah, that happens here at the end of the month. And then at that point, the ball is in the legislature's court. And the legislature will begin to have hearings. They'll begin to identify priorities. We'll begin to hear from stakeholders from the field. And I would just emphasize and kind of end with that note is ACSA, public educators, I mean, us as an association, our membership have been really, I think, successful in our advocacy in recent years as it relates to the budget. And we're going to need to hear from you all. We're going to work really hard to make sure that we're getting robust input from all of our membership, to inform our advocacy. We're going to rely on you all to have local conversations. We look forward to you being up here with us during our legislative action days, beating the drum throughout the legislature. And yeah, just I think I feel generally good about the starting place of this budget, considering of where we've been in January in recent years. But a lot of work to be done over the coming months to make sure that it's a budget that truly does prioritize and best serve public education.
All right, Yvonne Carrillo. Yvonne, you have some weekend work to get Cordell a background, a little plant or maybe a framed photo.
The other side of his office is incredible. If he would have just turned his camera, a mural, Catherine didn't see that part.
We'll get him something. You know what, Edgar? We could get him the 8x10s of you and me from our photo shoot from years ago.
Hey, back in the day, you know, this is the new world, right? Like, you don't need files. Like, you don't need we used to have the old school ed code in the back. Now you just go to the computer. You know, like I said, minimum. There we go.
Oh, there we go. See, I wasn't referring
fails.
to that photo. My goodness.
Never
geez, for some reason I knew
we set ourselves up.
I know we absolutely did. Hey, do want to make mention, Yvonne, thanks so much for being with us today on Budget Day. Want to make mention of this. Our good friend Jamie Green over in the comment section talking about secure rural schools and the full funding of IDEA. We've talked about that subject here, Edgar, on the lunch break. He says it's currently being worked on in committees in Washington to be released as bills for the 119th Congress. So that's been a big priority for ACSA.
Two big priorities.
And it's great to be able to put, but hopefully tie a bow around that.
Yeah. And I will say, and Jamie, who's been very consistent on this issue, you know, going back there, taking other members, really doing that grassroots advocacy that we always talk about. And I think on the rural schools piece, I think we're seeing some positive movement about the potential there. So we do hope that even with the changes, I think that on both issues that we can have some positive progress here in the months to come.
Yeah, I do want to make mention again, because you were in Southern California earlier today. We've had a number of members who've reached out to us about how they can support the wildfire victims in Southern California. And we have put vetted resources up on the ACSA Resource Hub. We'll go ahead and put a link to that in the chat. But Edgar, again, you were down in Southern California. You grew up in Southern California. Meeting with superintendents. Just give me your thoughts with what you saw, what the mood is there, what you heard from our colleagues.
Yeah, you know, on first, just a little bit of reflection. I know it's real easy to sometimes just almost get caught up of like, here we go again, another natural disaster, or right. Unfortunately, California has seen so many of these, whether it be fires, the mudslides. We've had flooding, you name it. California has endured it, right? For all the things that our state has to offer. This is part of life, unfortunately, especially with all the changes in the climate and whatnot. I have to say, even as such, even that we've seen this just being down there, and I was down there a short amount of time in the general region. I was on the west side and, you know, and close to the valley. It's so eerie. It's so stark seeing the footage on TV about families not only losing their homes, but their communities, their schools. In some cases, I know in talking to some of our members, this is another sad part of just our reality, that we have more and more members who have been through things like through incidents like this. I know on the flip side, the positive end is that we have so many of our members, like you said, who just want to help in some way. Hey, like I've been through this where up in Northern California, and then there's parallels if there's anybody that needs to talk. And I know right now for many of our superintendents this week who are either in the acute devastated areas, or even who are dealing with just school closures because of evacuations or air quality or whatnot, they're in the thick of it, but they're going to have to come out of that. And I know we have a cadre of folks here at ACSA who want to support. And I know we've been trying to think about what's our little way of just trying to lend a hand. And I know, like you talked about, some of those resources, not just on things that they can do with their community or some of these things that have been seen as useful in the past, but then just as simple as things as, hey, donate to some of the charities, to some of the philanthropic efforts that are going to those impacted, that's going to support the first responders. So we just kind of want to lift up those efforts that are already there. So appreciate the team. We've got this out on social media. We've got some emails out. I know we're going to share some of those links, but it goes without saying that we're thinking about the folks down south. And I know we're not through out of this. I know the forecast is a little scary here over the next couple of days. So we'll be watching and just hoping for the best to get on the other side of this here, hopefully soon.
Yeah, and some of that video that we just showed you of the fires, some of it was from an elementary school in Palisades. So definitely hitting home. Again, we do have those resources on the ACSA Resource Hub, vetted organizations that are taking donations, whether it be money, food, clothing, for the victims in Southern California. Again, that is in our chat. And then we just sent an email a couple of hours ago that have links to that. If you are somebody who receives ACSA emails, you got that, as well as a link to a list. If you have been involved in these types of natural disasters before, whether you've experienced them or you know of others who have, and you want to lend some support to our education leaders in those fire ravaged areas, you can go ahead and fill out a form and get involved in that. Edgar, we've talked budget. We've got more budget coverage for you on the Behind the Bills podcast with our own Ivan Carrillo, our Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. He hosts Behind the Bills. His next podcast is going to be focused more in depth on the new 25-26 budget. That's Behind the Bills. You can get that by scanning either of those QR codes. Also, you have a chance to win a $200 Amazon gift card. If you rate, review, and subscribe to Behind the Bills wherever you get your podcast from, send a screenshot of your review to behindthebills@ACSA.org, along with your name and contact information. Apparently, Edgar, you and I are not eligible to receive that $200 gift card. Folks, if you like what you've seen here on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, this special edition, we invite you to subscribe to us on Facebook or YouTube. And you will get instant alerts when we're about to come on with breaking news, and then our regularly scheduled Wednesday live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break at 1 p.m. And if you have great stories happening in your community, we want to tell your stories as well. Go ahead and send in your photos, your news releases, your talking points to our EdCal editor, Michelle Carl, at mcarl@axa.org. Edgar, final thoughts here.
Proud of the team, just like a lot of information in a short amount of time. They're right on top of it from the get-go. As Yvonne stated, a long way to go, but a good first step. I appreciate so many of our members on a Friday afternoon really chiming in to get the latest. The beginning of a process, but I think a positive one. And we'll see where this goes. I know we'll those of you that follow, we undoubtedly will have more to say here on the legislative lunch break. We're going to put out an analysis. We're going to have an email here out to all of our members later this afternoon with some more information and analysis. So just to start, but we count on us on ACSA to try to make sense of everything coming out from the state.
Yeah, we will be off next week. Edgar and I down at the Every Child Counts Symposium in Southern California. Make sure to say hello. And then we are back on the air on the 22nd. I believe it's the 22nd. We'll be talking about GPOWEP and the impact on all of our members and people across the country. Folks, thank you so much for joining us here on this special edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Remember, we are live and interactive Wednesdays here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day and weekend, and we'll see you next time.